In the summary of the gap analysis, we'll go through a little bit more on what are the gaps for CSPs who are trying to get cross-certified from level 1 to ISO, level 2 to ISO, and level 3 to ISO. Okay, so far what we've identified for MTCS level 1 CSPs, they need to look at several areas: leadership, planning, support, operation, performance evaluation, improvement, asset management, access control, and compliance. So if you can see, it includes the main clauses and the Annex A. Okay. While we have all these gaps, I just want to highlight that the gap is, the total percentage of the gap is 13%, so it's not that high. Yeah. And the highest gap for this particular section is performance evaluation at 45%. So what does it cover? It covers a bit of internal audit and management reviews. Coming back to the highlighted sections. So why are these highlighted in yellow? Operations, asset management, and compliance is because these are specific to level 1 CSPs. So they're quite basic, they're not very advanced gaps. While things like performance evaluation will have a bit more enhancements in place. Okay, so for level 2, still the same areas. Some of the previously highlighted areas have been removed from this because there are no gaps. So just now we saw 13%, level 2 is just 10%. Yeah, similarly, level 3, it's reduced by 9%, by 1%, so it's now 9%. Okay. A little bit more detail on the gaps that we've identified. So in total, we have 34 gaps, but 24 are common across all 3 MTCS levels. Yeah, so basically, if you look at policy, we have 5.2 here. It's common across level 1, 2, and 3 in MTCS. For planning, a bit on actions to address risks and opportunities, and a bit on establishing the information security objectives and planning to achieve them. Probably this is one of the examples. Yes. So we've already included this in the remarks column, but yeah, we'll reply to you on that separately. On support, a bit on competency, and documentation on the identified competency. Performance evaluation is the one with the highest number of gaps. We have internal audit, and we have management review. So just to summarize what these are, in essence, they are just components that need to be included in the management review. So for example, the results of the previous management reviews will need to be covered in the next management review session. Okay, just to cover a little bit more on the gaps that have been identified. For leadership, it's the inclusion of IS objectives in the policy. So this can be done whether via creation of framework or you embed these objectives within the policy itself. And then for planning, while performing the risk assessments, you need to achieve consistent, valid, and comparable results from the previous risk assessments. Yeah, identify risk owners, risk criteria, and risk prioritization. So when you see things, basic controls like this, it's only in level 1. Level 2 and level 3, they would be a bit more advanced. And then obtain risk owners' approval of the risk treatment plan, right? And establish the IS objectives and develop metrics to measure these objectives. For support, we're looking at development of relevant competency and implementation of controls to measure effectiveness. Yeah. So if you notice, it's not just put in place relevant competency and put in place effective. Yeah. So it does cover the specific verbs that are missing as well. And then a bit of documentation here and there on support, maintaining the documentation for retention And again, under operations, maintaining the documentation for risk treatments. Yeah. So performance evaluation, again, inclusion of internal audit scope. Scope of internal audit to include ISO 27001:2013. Yeah, and explicitly, the team needs to report the results to the relevant management as defined. And some of the components that we've highlighted here need to be included in the management reviews. There are more components, but just a few to highlight. Status of action from previous management reviews, changes in relevant external and internal issues, and feedback on the performance of the IS. Next one is on improvement. So this is the requirement on documentation of non-conformities, corrective actions, and results. And then going on to the annex, A8 on asset management, to define and implement information classification policy and procedures. This is to support the asset classification based on importance to the CSPs. Yeah. Access control, to define the access control policy to ensure the access to information and application system functions granted only to authorized personnel. Sounds basic, but the requirement in the gap analysis, if you look at it, some of them are not included. Yeah. Compliance, define and implement controls to ensure privacy and protection of the of personally identified information. So these are sensitive customer data based on the recently established PDPA. So back to some examples that you may face when you refer to the documents. So this is quite basic. So no gaps identified between ISO 27001:2013 and NTCS level 1. So if it's already classified as included, you won't find this clause in implementation guideline and audit checklist. Yeah. So this is how it looks like. 5.2 para 1A included. So when you go to the IG, the implementation guideline, you see you don't see 1A, you only see 1B. Yeah. Similarly, for the audit checklist, you don't see 1A, you only see 1B. Okay, so that's one of the most basic scenarios that you will encounter. So next example, identify gap is common across all three levels of NTCS against ISO 27001:2013. So what does this mean? 5.21B, for example, is a gap that's applicable for level 1, level 2, and level 3, and you will see the gap classification mentioned as incremental or new. Yeah. So how does it look like? For gap analysis, 5.2 para 1B here is incremental. So there's no mention of any levels. It's just one common gap. And the information in the remarks section is also applicable for all the levels. Yeah. Similarly, in the guideline, you will see in 8.1, which covers common gaps identified from level 1 to 3 here, you will have para 1B and the implementation guideline that we are recommending. The same thing with audit checklist, you will just carry through 1B in one cell, and we have all these three areas. So just now, like I mentioned, organizational control will cover basic citing of the documents, yeah, performance of controls, conducting interviews, and any other form of observation. So what are the key questions that you can ask in this case is, does the organization have documented controls? And do they have roles and responsibilities clearly defined? Okay. In terms of technical control and visual controls, we're looking at the performance of technical and physical controls via system review. So this includes inspection of systems in terms of configuration and physical inspection of controls. Yeah. So main questions to answer are the controls implemented as per documented? and does the control meet NTCS requirements. I think you're familiar with these processes, so I'm just going to browse through this. The third one is effectiveness review. So this is the one that is mainly applicable for level 3 in MTCS. The reason being is, while we have reviewed the documents and whatnot, we also need to be on site to perform effectiveness review through evaluation and review of testing results produced. So in this case, it's not sufficient to just review the documents or perform remote interviews and whatnot. You have to be on site. And so main questions to ask: are the control implementation effective to the risk level? So it's a bit more tricky. It's trickier. It's not just reviewing documents and reviewing system controls and system configuration. So does the control implemented achieve its purpose? It's more subjective. Okay, next example. Gaps identified between ISO 2013 and levels 1 and 2. Okay, so what does this mean? No gaps identified between level 3. However, gaps are identified between level 1 and 2 and ISO. So this is the example. So as you can see here, for this clause, for level 1 is incremental, level 2 is incremental, but level 3 is included. Right? So as such, this clause, this remark section will highlight what are the differences between different levels. So level 3, we do mention that elements or storage and data protection, but some other areas like redundancy and testing are not mentioned in level 1 and 2. So while this is a brief summary of what is not mentioned, if you look at the whole section, then you can have a bit more clarity on what are the other gaps. And then if you carry the gap all the way to implementation guideline, you will see the same thing. So it only brings forward the gaps, the ones with incremental. It doesn't bring forward the one under included. Same case with the audit checklist. So just to highlight, since this one is level 1 and 2, if you look at these two columns, usually you will either have this particular column checked, both checked, or for level 3, if it's level 3, then we'll have effectiveness review checked here as well. So commonly it's either one or both of this. Next one is gap identified between ISO 27001:2013 and level 1. Similar to the previous example, just that different clauses. So 6121E1, 6121E2, both level 1s are classified as incremental. However, level 2 and 3 are classified as included. Right? So it's quite basic. So based on this example, we're looking at here in the risk assessment, you need to include risk criteria. And here in the risk assessment, you need to include risk prioritization. So it makes sense that, probably in level 1 MTCS, it is treated as a gap. Okay. So similarly, when you look at the implementation guideline, the CSPs would probably look at these two with the summary of what they need to do. So if we talk about risk prioritization, risk criteria, they all fall under risk assessment umbrella, right? So as such, we have included one cell here that covers these two rows. So there are a bit of differences in the presentation of information. Okay, so if you carry that to the audit checklist, so when you refer to this document, you will also see that there is one summary here for these two gaps. Okay. So in this case, it's an easy one where you just have to review the documents, conduct interviews and whatnot.